You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. During the American Revolutionary War, the United States and Spain found themselves at odds over the territories of East and West Florida. The American revolutionaries had their sights set on all of British North America, including areas like Canada, the Floridas, and even Bermuda, hoping these regions would join the United States. Despite these aspirations, East and West Florida became refuges for loyalists seeking sanctuary from the Revolution. In 1779, Spain, allying with France, entered the war to support the American cause against Britain, but stopped short of formally recognizing the United States or making an official treaty with it by the war's end. Spain was aiming to regain control over Florida and Louisiana Oriental, which included the land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, extending up to the Ohio River, with a particular interest in monopolizing the Mississippi River. Meanwhile, the United States was set on securing all territories east of the Mississippi, including the Floridas, and was adamant about having free navigation of the Mississippi River. Should Spain retake Florida, the United States wanted assurance of access to a free port along the Gulf of Mexico. The conclusion of the American Revolutionary War with the 1783 Treaty of Paris saw the Floridas returning to Spanish control, while the United States gained territory between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, north of the 31st parallel, along with navigation rights on the Mississippi. With the transition of power in East Florida, the majority of the British population left, primarily moving to the Bahamas and the West Indies. Spain, however, did not agree with all aspects of the Treaty of Paris, notably disputing navigation rights on the Mississippi in 1784, and claiming more extensive boundaries for West Florida than those defined in the treaty. The relationship between the United States and Spain remained tense, fueled by disagreements over the welcoming of American settlers in Spanish colonies and Spanish support for Native American tribes against the United States. A significant breakthrough occurred in 1795 with the negotiation of Pinckney's Treaty, which clarified the boundary between the United States and Spanish Louisiana, set the northern boundary of West Florida along the 31st parallel, and allowed the United States navigation on the Mississippi River and storage rights in New Orleans. These concessions from Spain were seen as privileges, not inherent rights. In a game-changing move in 1800, France regained the Louisiana Territory from Spain through the Third Treaty of San Ildefonso, with the agreement vaguely outlining the extent of the territory similar to France's previous control and conditions before its transfer to Spain. France's ambitions included reclaiming the region from New Orleans to Mobile Bay and attempting to acquire East Florida. Although Spain handed over control of the Isle of Orleans and lands west of the Mississippi to France, it retained administration of all of West Florida to the Mississippi River, setting the stage for further territorial discussions in the evolving landscape of North American geopolitics. To secure a port on the Gulf of Mexico that Americans could safely access, U.S. diplomats in Europe were directed to attempt to buy the Isle of Orleans and West Florida from their current owner. In 1803, Robert Livingston approached France about acquiring the Isle of Orleans, but France surprised him by offering not just that but all of Louisiana instead. Though this offer went beyond their original mission, Livingston and James Monroe, who was sent to assist in the negotiations, saw a chance to also include the area from the east of the Mississippi to the Perdido River, making sure this was covered in the purchasing agreement by referring to the Treaty of San Ildefonso. President Thomas Jefferson, upon further examination, concluded that the Louisiana purchase did indeed encompass West Florida up to the Perdido River, bolstering the U.S. claim to Texas as well. However, Spain disputed the American claim to West Florida, west of the Perdido River, and was strong enough to scare off U.S. plans to set up a customs house in Mobile Bay in 1804. Despite Spain's protests, the U.S. didn't abandon its claims, and even eyed acquiring the rest of the Gulf Coast east of Louisiana. The original plan was to purchase West Florida, from the Perdido to the Apalachicola rivers and all of East Florida. However, the strategy shifted towards offering to take on Spanish debts owed to American citizens in exchange for Spain handing over the Floridas. The U.S. argued that taking East Florida would be a way to settle these debts. In 1808, the scene changed dramatically when Napoleon invaded Spain, forced King Ferdinand VII to give up the throne, and put his brother Joseph Bonaparte in charge. This led to strong resistance in Spain, resulting in the formation of a national government, the Cortes of Cadiz, which quickly allied with Great Britain against France. This alliance worried the U.S. because of the fear that Britain might establish bases or even occupy Spanish colonies like the Floridas, which would severely threaten the security of the U.S. southern border. Back in 1810, during a time called the Peninsular War, France had almost taken over Spain. This situation led to uprisings against the Spanish rulers across many of Spain's colonies in the Americas. In a specific area known as westernmost West Florida, which lies between the Mississippi and Pearl Rivers, local residents decided to take matters into their own hands. During the summer of that year, they gathered in Baton Rouge for a convention. Their biggest worries were about keeping the peace and making sure the French didn't grab control of their district. Initially, they tried setting up a government that would still recognize Spain's King Ferdinand VII, but would be controlled locally. However, when they found out that the Spanish governor was calling for military help to crush what he called an insurrection, the militia took action. They overtook the Spanish fort in Baton Rouge, and on September 26, 1810, they declared West Florida to be independent. The leaders of this new Republic of West Florida didn't waste any time asking the United States to take over the area and to help financially. President James Madison, on October 27, stated that West Florida was now part of the United States, thanks to the Louisiana Purchase. Although the U.S. had been holding back on kicking out the Spanish authorities to allow for a peaceful transition, Madison told Governor William C. Claiborne of the Territory of Orleans to go ahead and start governing the area as part of the territory. Meanwhile, settlers in West Florida and next door in the Mississippi Territory got busy with plans to take over Mobile and Pensacola. These areas were a bit further out from what the United States claimed as their own. The U.S. government didn't support these takeover attempts, known as filibustering. Juan Vicente Fulci Jaume, the governor of West Florida, really wanted to avoid any conflict. He even got rid of taxes on American goods at Mobile and said he'd hand over all of West Florida to the United States if he didn't get any support or orders from Havana or Veracruz by year's end. United States officials were really worried that France could take over Spain completely. If that happened, they thought Spain's colonies might end up being controlled by the French or taken over by Great Britain. On June 20, 1810, the Secretary of State at that time, Robert Smith, wrote to Senator William H. Crawford from Georgia. He wanted Crawford to find someone who could go to East Florida to collect information and spread the message that if settlers decided to rebel against Spanish rule, they would be welcomed by the United States. Crawford chose General George Matthews for the job. In January 1811, President Madison asked Congress for permission to take temporary possession of territories next to the U.S. to the east of the Perdido River. This included parts of West Florida and all of East Florida. The idea was to either accept these territories from local leaders or take control to keep them from falling into foreign hands, specifically not Spain's. Congress also set aside $100,000 for any necessary expenses and kept this resolution a secret until March 1812. To carry out this plan, General Matthews and Colonel John McKee were given special tasks. Matthews, a veteran of the Revolutionary War and a former governor of Georgia, along with McKee, a former militiaman and federal Indian agent, were crucial in this effort. Matthews had secret meetings with 5 influential settlers in East Florida, trying to gauge their interest in leaving Spain to join the U.S. One of these men was John Houston McIntosh, a wealthy landowner who was against the idea of Florida being a refuge for escaped slaves. He believed that taking over Florida was necessary to stop slaves from using it as a route to escape to the south. In September 1811, the British ambassador, Augustus Foster, complained to the U.S. about these moves in East Florida, specifically asking about Matthews' role in undermining Spanish control. James Monroe, who was Secretary of State then, replied in November, making it clear the U.S. wouldn't stand by if East Florida was taken over by another country, but he didn't address Foster's questions about Matthews directly. When these letters were made public by a newspaper, Matthews saw Monroe's response as a green light and started organizing a force, which called themselves the Patriots, to move against Spanish Florida. Before George Matthews united his group of patriots, there were already signs of trouble brewing in East Florida. At the beginning of January 1811, George J.F. Clark, who was the Deputy Surveyor General of East Florida and a dedicated supporter of Spain, wrote about some troublemakers from Georgia. These individuals had crossed the border and set up camp near Fernandina, aiming to cause chaos in the area. It turned out they were following orders from Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Adams Smith, the commanding officer of the U.S. military post at Point Peter in Georgia, just a stone's throw from Amelia Island, Florida. Clark also noted that these troublemakers were cooperating with the Patriots and were part of Matthews' ambitious plan for Florida, revealing an early hint of the United States' interest in the region. In the summer of 1811, Matthews and John Houston McIntosh hashed out a strategy to establish a provisional authority in Spanish Florida. This authority would facilitate the transfer of the territory to the United States, essentially allowing the U.S. to expand its territory without outright aggression towards Spain. Matthews faced a challenge in rallying support among the locals, so he mostly gathered his forces from north of the St. Mary's River, particularly volunteers from Camden County, Georgia, and members of General John Floyd's militia, to avoid tipping off Spanish authorities in St. Augustine. By March 1812, the group, now numbering around 125 men, including volunteers from Georgia, Tennessee, and maybe a few Spanish defectors, identified themselves as the Patriots. To strengthen his forces, Matthews plotted to incorporate U.S. troops stationed near the Florida-Georgia border. He promised deserters pardons and the reinstatement of their ranks after the insurrection. Initially, Major Jacinth Laval, temporarily in charge at Point Peter during Colonel Smith's absence, declined to support Matthews with troops or weapons due to a personal disliking between the two. However, upon Colonel Smith's return on March 16, he agreed to Matthews' request. The next day, 50 soldiers teamed up with the Patriots to advance on Fernandina, and on the very same day, John Houston McIntosh was selected to lead them. Meanwhile, Matthews reached out to Commodore Hugh G. Campbell for naval support and weaponry, but Campbell distanced himself from Matthews' objectives, stating he had no orders to engage. Nonetheless, on March 17, 1812, 5 gunboats positioned themselves on the St. Mary's River and aimed at the city as the Patriot force took control of Fernandina, marking a significant moment in their campaign. On March 17, 1812, the Patriots arrived in Fernandina, took down the Spanish flag, and hoisted their own. During the ceremony, a Patriot officer made a speech dedicating the town to the United States. Colonel Smith, representing the U.S. at the event, accepted the offer and vowed to protect the city. This agreement was later incorporated into a treaty with Spain that included 6 provisions. The U.S. would govern and protect Fernandina, honor Spanish land grants, offer employment to Spanish soldiers switching sides, and keep the ports open to British trade until May 1813. This move was likely to keep the local economy stable, which relied heavily on trade with England. In the weeks following, the Patriots, accompanied by Colonel Smith and his forces, moved toward St. Augustine, declaring U.S. sovereignty over each place they passed, eventually establishing a base at Fort Mose outside St. Augustine. By April, the U.S. government was worried about being drawn into war with Spain and Britain. James Monroe on April 4 disavowed the Patriots' actions as unauthorized. In response, Congress replaced the expedition's leader Matthews with David Mitchell, the governor of Georgia, who did not alter the course of action. On July 17, 1812, the Patriots drafted a constitution with John Houston McIntosh as president. Feeling betrayed by the U.S. government's stance, Matthews vowed to confront them in Washington but fell ill with malaria and died on August 30, 1812, in Augusta, Georgia. Later, in September 1812, Georgia militiamen led by Colonel Smith were ambushed by a coalition of Seminoles and their allies near what's now Gainesville. The Seminole leader, King Payne, was fatally wounded. By December, the Patriots were criticized for widespread destruction and causing residents to flee. In January 1814, they built Fort Mitchell in Alachua County, declaring it the capital of the Republic of East Florida, and sought to join the U.S. They also offered military support against the British in the ongoing War of 1812. General Buckner F. Harris, who played a key role in establishing Fort Mitchell and appropriating land for farming, was killed by Seminoles in May 1814, leading to the fort's abandonment. The war was not exactly embraced by politicians or the public alike. After the conflict, figures like John Houston McIntosh, who had played significant roles in the rebellion, went to great lengths to restore their reputations. McIntosh even took the U.S. government to court, fighting to recover the financial losses he suffered because of the war, and he eventually won. During this period, many Seminole people, along with African Americans, both enslaved and free, left East Florida. They moved further south, finding new homes in areas like the Peace River region. In the summer of 1817, a unique adventure unfolded as another group known as filibusters made their way from the United States into Spanish Florida. They set up a provisional government in Fernandina. This diverse group, which included some veterans from the War of 1812 along with a mix of mercenaries and pirates, was led by Gregor MacGregor, a Scottish soldier with a reputation as a conman. They called their temporary rule the Republic of the Floridas. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.